for. For him to stand up now when he's running for office and try to convince us that he's conservative, there's just nothing in action that tells me that that's the truth. There's a lot of rhetoric, but he's running for office. You have to take that with a grain of salt and do your research and see who he really is.
Yeah, and if you want action, I was just told on Periscope that Rand Paul just shot the U.S. tax code with an AR-15. Now that's action.
Yes, that's action. That sounds like Rand.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, that'll get somebody's attention, and I hope look, if this GOP debate is a chance for them to go at each other, that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to that. I got to tell you, Donald Trump has a way though of being dismissive, and it comes off as so like cartoonish bravado. Like when I like Rand Paul's my. If I was voting, I'd vote for Rand Paul. But when Trump looked at him in that first debate and said, "You're having a bad night," it was hilarious. It was hilarious, and Rand really doesn't know how to deal with that. He's so dry.
No, and something that a lot of people don't know about Rand, and when you watch him and knowing this, is that he's had to take a lot of coaching because he's actually a very, very shy person one-on-one. And so him being on that debate stage, one of the reasons why he has the notes and stuff in front of him is because, like his dad, he struggles being in front of a crowd, and he's doing this and he ran for Senate because he believes in the principles that he's espousing, not because he enjoys being center of attention, because he actually doesn't. So when somebody like Donald Trump, who, in my opinion, is the opposite of that and thrives on attention, and in his speech in Texas was upset that his name wasn't in the headlines one morning, Rand and Trump are polar opposites. They're seeing them kind of spar is interesting because of that personality so different.
It's great, isn't it? By the way, I just had I pushed the wrong buttons, and my partner Jeremy was in here, and he was working on something I screwed up on a computer next to me, and all that was in the Periscope screen was his rear end. And so Miss Sarah Moon just pointed that out. She said, "I see somebody's booty." I just want everybody to know that was Jeremy's rear end, and on a scale of 1 to 10 on Periscope, I'm going to let them rate his derriere. But anyway, Christy Brown, back to you. Back to you. 9.5. Miss Sarah Moon gives him a 9.5. That'll brighten up his day.
Bad.
That'll brighten up anybody's day. So what do you expect, though, tonight? Do you expect Trump again to steal center stage? I noticed, what are you looking to see?
I would like to see both. I would like to see Cruz, for one, stop playing kissy face with Donald Trump and actually challenge him on some of his policies. I would like to see Carson do the same thing. Carson, it's interesting to me, Burnie, that the three people that are not in political office right now or haven't held one previously are the ones that are climbing in the polls. So I think that needs that the politicians that are on the stage, whether they're a first-time senator or they've been around for a while as governors, that they need to really pick up on that, because there's a sentiment in the country that people are wanting people that are not part of the establishment. So I think they need to figure out a message. I'd love to see a message come from Rand. I think he started it last time, and I think that's how he should have opened the first debate, which is that I'm not a normal, I'm not your regular kind of Republican. I think that resonates with people. I'd like to see a little bit more of that. I want to see Carly and Donald Trump go head-to-head, because I think I disagree with Carly on some of her policies, but when it comes to being a little bit sassy, but very poignant, I think that she is perfect to take Donald Trump down a notch. And I think I want to see that happen, because to me, his personality, and I don't exactly get along with that. To me, he makes Obama look humble, and I think he needs to be. I want a president that understands that the executive office is limited. And one of the things I just told someone is that I'm going to count how many times I hear the word Constitution tonight. I want to know whose policies actually are going to fall in line with the Constitution and who has no idea what the actual job of the president is. And so I'm actually going to keep a little notebook next to me, and I'm going to see how many times the word Constitution is mentioned tonight.
Very interesting. Tomorrow is Constitution Day, and I've been talking about it a little bit today, and I've been talking to my school district about it too. And the Bay District School, they know that tomorrow's Constitution Day, and so at least it will get a mention. And I didn't have time to create a video, but I'm going to work on maybe a 10-minute video that really covers, where the Constitution comes from, what it is, what it does, why it's relevant, and covers some of the gotcha things like the Commerce Clause or the Supremacy Clause,
Mhm.
or in the Second Amendment, where everybody tries to bring up muskets and militia. I really want to cover something like that. But what are your basic thoughts? So, Constitution is a big deal to you, as it is to me. What are your thoughts on Constitution Day? What would you like to see done in schools or just among friends?
Sure. I have there's a couple organizations that hold, their big event is on Constitution Day every year, and that's what they call it, is the Constitution Day banquet or whatever. And there's the Republican Liberty Caucus actually awards what they call it the Jefferson Cup, which was a cup that Thomas Jefferson actually passed down to people that he felt like made the biggest difference for liberty and the glorious cause, as George Washington called it. And so they recreate that, and they actually give that away to somebody within the state organization each year. And that's always a fun thing. I would love to see like the Republican Party that claims to be the party of limited government, which is a term that comes from it's not in the Constitution, but it comes from the confines of the Constitution, to actually put Constitution Day a little bit higher on their radar, instead of creating fundraising events and stuff like that are around figures, actually to promote that the Constitution is the rule of law and the law of the land, and to hold it in a little bit higher regard. I would love to see that happen. I don't think it is anywhere that I'm aware of, but I would love to see the people that claim that is what they govern by and what their policies are founded around actually put it in a little bit higher prominence. That would be great. I always take a moment and read an excerpt from one of Bruce Vine's books, that just kind of explains a little bit about the origins of the Constitution, and it goes over George Washington's speech about the glorious cause, meaning the American Revolution, and why they wrote the Constitution to found a government that was given power by the states and not the other way around. And that's always what sticks out to me, is that the states created the federal government, and the Constitution was the contract that created the federal government, and the states could, at the time of the ratifying of the Constitution, walk away if they wanted to, and now it's the other way around. So I'd love to see people begin to acknowledge that. Schools teach in general about the Constitution and civics and what it means and why it's important, and actually know what's in it and where it came from and what the original intent was. It's not a living document that gets to change according to culture. And a lot of people don't know that. We have a president that says the opposite, that says that he can basically make it whatever he wants for today because it's a living document that's always changing. It's not. It's written in black and white. So I would love to see some of these conversations take place and some of these things be taught in schools, so that we have a educated children, growing up, instead of just taking at face value whatever politicians say.
Yeah, Obama actually called the Constitution a remarkable but flawed political document. It is more than a political document. It is the document that created his job, that created all three branches of government. And, and that's what ticks me off about him, is when he talks about fundamentally transforming the United States of America into O-America, as I call it. You really can't do that, not by right. But by might, he is doing it. And by, one of the things I've said today is that President Obama is more than a president to the extent that Congress is less than a Congress. And if you think about that, Congress has abdicated their power and handed it over. And I still want to know if it's because they are on the take or if it's because they're being compromised. But one other thing, you mentioned the American Revolution and George Washington, thoughts about it. And you know what I would love to see kids learn in schools? And I've taken a look at some of the things that kids are learning in social studies. And I'm just going to go out on a limb, Christy Brown, and I'm going to say, rather than kids learning about Native American lesbians and their contributions to literature, what I'd really like them to learn is about revolutions throughout history. Let's look at the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution and the Cuban Revolution and the American Revolution, all which happened within about 100 years of each other, maybe even less than that. And you take a look at three of those were about usurping power, And one of them was about dissolving power. The American Revolution is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was listening to, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but Mike Church has out, basically it's like Adventures in Odyssey, which is like a story on the radio, but it's all acted and stuff like that. And I was listening to it on the way back from Jacksonville today. And one of the things that I thought was amazing is that the leadership that was that we see as the leadership, as the heroes of the revolution, were not attention hungry. You know, George Washington felt like he was not equipped to even lead the army, let alone be president. And him and John Adams had talked about it. Neither one of them knew what was coming, down for them in the future. And, when I look at past leaders and I see, that they were so committed to the cause of freedom and liberty and being able to bring it to those around them, that they convinced other people that they were right and were willing to die for it. I mean, there's no other way to put that. If you don't think something is valuable enough that you'll die for it, there's no other. I don't think there's any other higher cost that you can put on something. And these guys listen, and it's give me liberty or give me death.
Yeah.
It's not give me liberty or I'll vote for the Democrats. Like that really seems like the way that we've come around in the country. So I think it's interesting that so many people don't know the history of America, and that tells me that we're doomed to repeat it. One of my favorite pastimes is I go through and read about the people that we've been told are villains or that we've been told are good guys, and I try to find what was written about them at the time, and I try to see, what was the public thinking about George Washington or James Madison, at the time, and go through and see. And these guys weren't considered heroes during their lifetime. They changed and created the greatest experiment of giving liberty to a whole nation. And at the time they were a very small group. It's not like they didn't have the whole country behind them. And I think that's what people think. People think in order to actually bring any change about or to bring America today back to its constitutional confines, that we need the majority of Americans to be, ready to fight for it. And that's not how the revolution took place. One of the figures I read said that about 11% of the colonies at the time were pro-revolution. That's a very small number.
Right, because a lot of people don't realize these were Englishmen, and they were proud to be part of the British Empire. They were proud, and even the ones who broke, they had an allegiance problem. Their guilt haunted them because they almost felt like they were being traitors, And you mentioned give me liberty or give me death. Today, some of the people I admire most and are closest to me, Christy Brown, I feel like might say give me liberty or give me death, but I can't lose my job over it. And I really don't want to lose any friends, Burnie. I mean, I've got to see these people in the store and at parties. I don't want to lose access to the nicest parties around town. So, let's be a little more gentle. It's not the same thing. And one of the questions I've been asking people is, what are you willing to lose? And then I just listen, because it's painful. It's painful to lose your job and to lose friends. But I think it's more painful. It would be more painful for me to lose my values and to have people not believe in me anymore.
Yeah, and I think, I always apply that to all of your belief systems. My dad says that it is not a conviction if you wouldn't put your life on the line for it. Well, my dad's in the ministry, so he's talking about his Christian belief and standing up for Jesus. But I think the same thing applies. I think that we've seen that with the founding of America. With these guys were willing, they were so convicted that men were meant to be free, that it was a natural right to have freedom, that they were willing to die for it. And I think until we get back to that, when you talked about the Russian Revolution, and when you read the writings of Lenin's whole life was devoted to changing the political culture. Now, I disagree with what his thoughts were on it, but he gave up everything to see change come. Mm-hmm. And, I think until at least a small, fiery group of Americans get to that point and are united together and not fighting against each other the way that elections typically have us do, we're not going to see a lot of change, because it's not until people have that conviction and actually start something the way they did in Egypt. You know, we've quit our jobs and we're staying here outside of government offices until we get our way. We're sick of government telling us what to do, so we're here. What are you going to do? You know, and I think that we've seen it happen many times, and I just don't see that the American public they haven't felt enough pain yet to be willing to do that.
You know, I always think that God, Jefferson said that the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. In other words, God stamped liberty on our DNA. He stamped liberty on our DNA. And I don't know what happens to people to have it sort of erased. I know that there are great beguilers who are good at erasing it, but people are born with that yearning to be free to live self-directed lives and pursue happiness the way they see fit. And I did not realize that when I started doing talk radio in 2007, I didn't realize that I would spend half my time, Christy Brown, half my time trying to convince people that, no, you are a free and dignified human being, and those politicians really don't lord over you, even if they promise to fight for you and give you other people's stuff. And that has become a harder argument than arguing against people like Barack Obama.
Yeah, I think, and it's amazing to me. I had a couple of conversations in the last couple of days about Bernie Sanders and, comparing his policies to Republican policies. And I think the problem is that when you lose your principles and you just begin to support a party, no matter what party that is, that you lose sight of what the actual goal is. I think it was, I read it. I can't remember who it was. It was Nietzsche that said, part of winning the battle is knowing what winning looks like. And I think that I think tends to elude a lot of people that say they believe in liberty and that say that they believe in natural rights. And whenever somebody gets in office that sounds kind of good or is not establishment, so they think that they're going to be able to stick it to the establishment, they think that's the argument to be able to vote for them. I think that's what we're seeing with Donald Trump. I think the argument for Donald Trump is nothing more than the argument against the establishment. And what people miss is that two things can be true at the same time. The establishment can be wrong, and they can be cowards to not stand up to Obama, and they can have lost their way in principle. But that doesn't. It's also true that Donald Trump is not a conservative in any action that I have seen. And so making an argument for one doesn't automatically mean the other one's right. And I think for whatever reason, we have this either-or mindset. In every election and every policy, you see you're either for or against. There's nothing in between. There's no other way to change it. And I think that the American people get very confused about what their actual principles are because they're so busy fighting against the other guy that they lose sight of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And that's why I keep pointing out the pendulum swing. Obama was a pendulum swing from George W. Bush, and Trump is a pendulum swing from Obama. And that's what Americans have looked for now. They've looked for the opposite of rather than what's good. And you're the one with the great quote. You once said, and I say it all the time now, it's time for the GOP to stop being the lesser of two evils and start being the good party. And I don't think we need another pendulum swing. I think we need something solid and grounded and centered on liberty. And that brings me to a post that you made on Facebook yesterday. You said, let's replace hashtag Make America Great Again with hashtag Make Liberty Great Again. Tell us what you mean by that, because I love that.
Well, I mean that I believe that most of the people that think that America is great simply think that America is great because, we're the biggest and the strongest and the wealthiest. And I believe what makes America great is that we support liberty and that our government is founded, our federal government is founded on natural rights. So I think the whole process of making America great is to restore individual liberty and to recognize the fact that the individual is sovereign above the states, above any government, and that's what the founders did. And I think the goal to make America great again needs to start with let's make individual liberty the focus, because that's what will make America great again.
And I think that America cannot possibly be great without understanding liberty. So we've got to understand what liberty is. And I keep saying at the heart of patriotism is liberty. And at the heart of liberty is God, at least in the way that it was explained by our founders and expressed and articulated in the Declaration of Independence and in the natural rights theory that we base everything on in America. And I'm telling you, I'm writing down from our conversation, I'm writing down questions that I would love to see every student be able to ask and every teacher understand. And that is, what made the American Revolution? What made it different than the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution or the Cuban Revolution? And kids need to know this stuff. And also, I think they need to know the difference between natural rights and civil liberties. I don't believe in civil liberties because those are simply dispensations of government. And if man can give you a liberty, man can take it away. And that's different, isn't it, from natural rights that you're born with?
Yeah, natural rights are something that everybody has, and that's one thing I think that Americans need to understand as well, is that your rights don't come from the Bill of Rights. They come from God, and the Bill of Rights was written to protect them from government, not to be given to you by government. That's one of the big things that I talk to people all the time that don't understand that. And some of the issues that we've had with how we treat prisoners and stuff like that people want to talk about, and they say, well, they're not American, so they don't have rights under the Constitution. And they miss the whole point that the right in the Constitution wasn't the government, the benevolent kind government, deciding that you're worthy of these rights. It was them enshrining them and making sure that the government would not be able to take them from you because they didn't have the right to. The government's not stronger than God.
Them.
Right.
Yeah, it didn't originate from them. That and I love that. And another question I would write is that one. I want every student and teacher to be able to answer, what are rights? What are rights, and where do they come from? And I learned from Ayn Rand in a great book called Capitalism: The Unknown Ideal, and this really helped me understand. I couldn't quite put into words before I read this book back in '98 or so, why healthcare was not a right. Because a lot of people told me, we have a right to good healthcare, Burnie. It's an essential. And I couldn't really answer the question until I understood that rights never collide. When one person's rights collide with another person's rights, when one person can make claim on another person's time, energy, money, then you have identified something that is not a right.
Yeah, and I asked the same form. Whenever I talked to, I actually posted up a question about Bernie Sanders, and I just said, if you're able to take money from the rich in America, then how come the people in Bangladesh who are all poor and living in poverty can't come take from you? And the premise of that being that, if you make $22,000 a year, you're in the top 1% of the world. So how come the rest of the world can't come take from you? And it began, and that was what one of the questions I asked is, what gives you the authority to take from others if others can't take from you? And my answer when he came back and said, basically because he's allowed to, was that your rights they don't collide. Once somebody else's rights begin, your rights end, and you don't get to go infringe upon their rights. You have no authority to do that. Not you and not the government, and that's where people miss it.
They really do. Hey, by the way, you mentioned a book that I need to get because I read all of Judge Andrew Napolitano's books. I think he is such a great American patriot, and he's amazing. And the first book, by the way, if anybody wants to get it, that really got me onto reading his books was, Constitutional Chaos. That was the name of it. Constitutional Chaos by Judge Andrew Napolitano. And he even came on the show and we talked about it. He's amazing. And now I guess he's written a new book called Theodore and Woodrow. And I don't know what the subtitle is. I can't see it, but it's pretty good, huh?
It's excellent. The subtitle is How Two American Presidents Destroyed America's Constitutional Freedoms.
Tell us basically, because we're looking at the beginning of the 20th century now, Theodore and Woodrow, how did they begin the real destruction of America?
Well, it started out with that Theodore just simply was bullied as a kid and decided that if he was in power, he didn't get bullied anymore, and so he kind of transferred that into the presidency. He was vice president first, and then when the president was assassinated, he became president. And he started out by actually going in and being integral in creating the Department of Education, making education compulsory, and because he said that, along with the Rothschilds and a few others, that the children need to be taken away from ignorant parents and educated to be good government citizens. So that's the first thing, which I think is amazing that he was so clear on that. Under the two of them, the IRS was created, the FDA was created, the FTC was created, the FBI was created. The FBI was created because Woodrow wanted to be able to have his own task force of people that he could stick on people if they disagreed with him. That's how that actually got started. And both of them made the same argument as they were forming all of these departments that completely disregarded the Constitution, that the Constitution was a living document, that it was flawed and mistaken, and that it needed to be changed for the times. And instead of actually using the Constitution's guidelines to change it and amending it to do what they needed to do, they just used the executive branch and basically did whatever they wanted to. What's interesting is in each chapter, Judge Napolitano goes through all these different departments, and he outlines the corruption and the agenda of the men that were running these departments from the beginning. So the FDA, for example, his name was Wiley, the guy that was over the FDA, or the Pure Food and Drug Administration, is how it started out. And he was best friends with Heinz and Heinz ketchup. And so he took it upon himself to sue any other ketchup manufacturer saying that their recipe was not pure. And he ended up putting people out of business. And that was the beginning of the government picking winners and losers in business, and then liberals saying, well, it was because there wasn't enough regulation. And it was actually because the government doesn't belong in the marketplace at all. And giving the government that kind of power just continued to grow with each new department, gave the government as a whole more and more power, specifically the executive branch.
Wow. Yeah, the book is called Theodore and Woodrow by Judge Andrew Napolitano. And, Jonah Goldberg calls Woodrow Wilson the first fascist of the 20th century. The first fascist, not just in America, in the world, the first fascist. And Woodrow Wilson, a lot of people, this is what kills me, Christy Brown, is a lot of people think that Obama or no president, they said no president would ever arrest you, Burnie, for doing something like, reading the Constitution in public, but actually Woodrow Wilson had Upton Sinclair arrested for reading the Bill of Rights at a rally. He was arrested because at the time I believe it had the Sedition Act, which meant if you criticized your government, American forces would arrest you. So anybody who says Obama would never do that or Bush would never do that, hey, look, America has already done that before. So that is part of American history.
Yeah, and what was interesting is that Judge Napolitano actually gets into some of the history of Upton Sinclair, and I have remembered him as being a good guy that kind of blew the whistle on some companies that weren't doing what they were supposed to do, and I remember that he got arrested for reading the Bill of Rights. But the actual story of that is in the book, and a lot of the stuff that Upton Sinclair wrote about that happened in the meatpacking district was completely made up. And it was used to create the Pure Food and Drug
Act. It was a propaganda book. I have a friend of mine who wants me to read that book so bad, and if I had time to lounge around in a hammock, I'd read the book. But I have choices I got to make, and I'd rather read Judge Napolitano's book than that propaganda book by Upton Sinclair.
What's interesting is that the president, which was Roosevelt at the time, he sent people to investigate those plants that Upton Sinclair wrote about. And he knew it was false, but because the public was such an outrage because of the media-generated frenzy about, people falling into vats and getting ground up with the meat that they were then packaging and selling, all of this outrageous, sensational stuff, Roosevelt used that to his advantage, and that's how he was able to grow government. and even though he knew that it was a lie.
Mm-hmm. Christy Brown, you're also keeping an eye. Before I let you go, tell us a little bit about, you are always catching the Republican Party doing some stuff. And now you've got, the Republican Executive Committee. I mean, is it not amazing the extent to which the establishment Republicans will go to keep real conservatives away from any office?
It's amazing. Like, I really, and this is probably just me trying to believe the best in people, but after some of the shenanigans that were pulled at the RNC in Tampa in 2012, I really thought that the Republicans would have learned their lesson. You know, they lost to Obama again, you know, and I just really thought that maybe they would begin to see the light. But what's happening now has happened before. This happened in 2008. I saw it happen, where the Republican executive committees, which are the committees in each county that kind of oversees the party in that county, the Democrats and the Republicans have them, you can become a member of that. You usually have to come to 2 or 3 meetings and become a member. And so the whole point of the parties is to grow and to bring more people into the principles and philosophies of the party. But the problem is like the party nationally, so many people are just in leadership and want power. And so in Seminole County, there's actually a court injunction against the Republican Executive Committee, the REC, for not following its own rules and procedures. And one of the things that John Locke talks about is that liberty equals procedure. So if you go to register to vote and then I go to register to vote, we go through the same process. And the parties are also run on procedures. But what happens is if they see that they might lose power, suddenly those procedures go out the door. And what's happening in Seminole County is that they're using parliamentary procedure to adjourn the meeting before people can be voted into the executive committee so that new leadership is not elected. At the last meeting, some of the leadership actually went out into the hallway and texted people to come out there so that they wouldn't have enough people, it's called a quorum, to be able to vote new members in, because they're so scared if these new members get voted in, these conservative members get voted in, that they'll lose their seats of power within the county executive committee.
Wow. Well, I said that was the last question, but I do want to ask you one more, because I asked you this last time that you joined us. And by the way, Christy Brown is a regular contributor here, and you can find her online on Twitter at KRISTI, Christy Renee Brown on Twitter. I hope you'll follow her. And, of course, on Facebook at KRISTI, Christy Brown. And we're gonna post this. I'm going to give you the audio to the show so you can do whatever you want with it, Christy. But we had Matt Gaetz, Representative Matt Gaetz, state rep, who is running for his father's, the seat that his father currently holds, the state Senate seat. And I've been busting him, and I mean every day. I don't know if you see on Twitter. Every day I get on Matt Gaetz because he says and he votes against Common Core and amnesty, but he's, quote, all in for Jeb with enthusiasm, all in for Jeb. And I just can't process it. And I can't live in that kind of world where you say that you're against amnesty, because I think if there is no, there will be no GOP if there's no America. And if we continue to do what we're doing with amnesty, there's going to be no America. I'm looking at a brand new headline. Now Obama doesn't want just 10,000 Syrian refugees. He wants 100,000. And you cannot support a guy like Jeb Bush and hope that there's going to be a country. So I want to know what your basic thoughts are about Matt Gaetz, a very interesting political figure, the son of Don Corleone Gaetz, 33 years old, very articulate, understands the principles of conservatism, votes pretty well, but do you think he's a good candidate?
Well, I have to give him props for coming on and talking to you and defending his position. That's something that most politicians would not do.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't. I obviously don't live in his district, but I probably would not support somebody that claimed to be against, Common Core and amnesty and has voted against it previously, but then supports a candidate that is the opposite of that. Because to me, if you're supporting somebody for federal office who then can come in and bully the states into subjection, because that's what they do, then you're not actually against those programs, regardless of how you voted, or you don't understand, the position that you're putting that person in. So I only got to hear part of your interview with Matt, but I would love to know really what's in it for Matt. Does he think that, if Jeb gets into office, is he going to end up, somewhere in a position of authority in D.C., or what is in it for him? Because either he doesn't believe what he has said that he does believe, or he is willing to give up those principles in order to gain a little bit more power or influence over somebody that he thinks might have power in the future.
Like Chris Ann Hall said, she said, look, I speak about the Constitution. I write books about the Constitution. Could you imagine if I endorsed somebody who was anti-Constitution? I mean, your credibility goes out the window. And you know what I told Matt, and I said it on purpose. I said, look, Matt, the only people who would ever endorse something contrary to their own values are politicians and lawyers. He's both. But I don't know anybody else. I don't know normal people who would do that. You have got to have been in the Capitol for far too long, or in law school for far too long, to be able to do that and think it's normal. Normal people don't do that, right?
I typically would have agreed with that statement, but it appears to me like conservatives, people that I know are conservatives, that I've talked to, that I know what they believe, are getting behind candidates, a couple of them behind Chris Christie, a couple behind Lindsey Graham, and many behind Donald Trump,
Rick Santorum,
that claim to believe one thing. I'm sorry?
Rick Santorum.
Yeah, Rick Santorum. And they don't actually support anything that they claim to stand for. So it seems like the people are now following the politicians' lead, and so we don't stand for anything.
Very interesting. Well, Christy Brown, thank you for spending so much time for us. I'll get this clip so you can share it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Burnie.
All right, I'll see you soon. Christy Brown from Jacksonville. Again, you can find her at Kristi, Christy Renee Brown at on Twitter and on Facebook. She's just fantastic, and she's been doing this for a long time. Speaking of guys like Jeb Bush, there's a third grade boy I know, and he's like my daughters, who are 11 and almost 13. They're taking, it's a great idea. I'll write this down. Somebody just said define conservative, because I've tried to define patriot, and I've tried to define conservative. Awesome challenge. So I know this third grade boy, and he's learning Common Core math, and it has become apparent that, thanks Christy Brown, that very, very, very smart children are getting to the point that they cannot do basic math the way that we did math. What's 17 minus 6? What is 4 times 6? 7 times 9? Not being taught in schools. Common Core doesn't teach that. And I wonder if it's by design. Do you ever think that Common Core, by design, is trying to ensure that the smartest of our kids can only function at the level of the least smart of our kids? In other words, you've heard the saying that you're only as strong as your weakest link. Common Core tries to take all kids and make them the weakest link. Why? And I can't help but think it's by design. Do you think it's by design or by accident? And if it is by design, how the hell is Jeb Bush supporting it? That's right. I love that. Redistribute wealth, redistribute knowledge. I'm writing this down because I just thought of it. Common Core seems to be the weakest link. It seems to make sure that all kids are operating at the capacity of the weakest link. And that seems to me by design. I'll tell you what also seems to me by design. And I don't know if I'm getting paranoid in my old age, but you know what? When 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, it always equals 3. And when I start seeing things add up over and over and over and over in patterns and trends, I start to really wonder about the Republicans and the Democrats. I've told you that they are no longer recognizable. Okay? Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush are less Democrats and Republicans than they are insiders and outsiders. They are the quintessential insiders, right? And they're not conservatives or liberals; they're insiders. And if you look at if you look at leaders in Europe, for them to, this is important what I'm going to say. This might be a time where you pick up your pen, as I would say if I was teaching college English again. This might be something you might want to write down, right? Why are the world leaders, the Western world leaders, orchestrating an invasion of illegal aliens and Middle Eastern refugees? Why are they doing this? Why are they dumbing down our children in compulsory government education? Why at every turn does it appear that they are doing all they can to put the burden on citizens to the point that citizens can't hold up anymore? The center cannot hold. The citizens cannot hold. And the best among us do very little, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. That's from a poem, by the way. That's from a poem, and I can't remember the name of the poem. If you Google that, or if you search it on a different search engine, the center, and it's spelled Centre in this poem, cannot hold. And the best are not doing much, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. The worst among us in the world are full of passionate intensity. I wonder if world leaders who are laying down red carpets for Syrian refugees, it wasn't enough in America to be stampeded with illegal aliens from Mexico and coming through Mexico. Now, see, just remember, just 2 days ago I told you that Obama wants 10,000 Syrian refugees. The headline today, now he wants 100,000. Obama wants 100,000 Syrian refugees. And, okay, hold on now. Buckle up, because here's why. He says America's got to do its fair share. America's got to do its fair share, and therefore we need to bring in Syrian refugees because of global warming. I know. Hashtag era of non sequiturs. He says America has to do its part and bring in more than 100,000 Syrian refugees because of global warming. You think about that while you're making breakfast in the morning. Does that make any sense? But we live in the era of non sequiturs. And the Republicans do not check him, which tells me it's not politics as usual. It is no longer Republicans versus Democrats. It's the insiders versus the outsiders, and we're on the outside. It's kind of like the Hunger Games, but maybe not as funny as the Hunger Games. You think about that. Western civilization. Here's the part where I'd recommend you grab your pen. Whether it's because you agree or because you want to refute what I'm saying, you may want to grab your pen, because I'm about to tell you something. Here it is. Western civilization is on its knees, holding a knife at its own neck. Suicide of the West. And it tells me that the insiders, the political elite, they believe that they will never be hurt by the Syrian rebels who they're bringing in with red carpets, that they will never be hurt by the joblessness or the torture rack known as Obamacare. These things are to affect the unwashed masses not the political elite. They think they're immune to it. They think that history doesn't apply to them. And I'll tell you what justice is. Justice is when the Syrian rebels that they move in are in their neighborhoods. Justice is when they have to get on Obamacare. And justice is not far away. And that is why I tell people, like especially establishment Republicans, the whiffums, right? The what's in it for me, the whiffums, what's in it for me Republicans. If it's not good for America, it can't possibly be good for you. And there will be no GOP if there is no America. And right now, Western civilization is on its knees, holding a knife at its own neck. And what are we doing about it? I promise you I'm doing all I can do. And if you'll link arms with me, if you'll join me, we'll make the ground rumble. But it requires that you and I link arms, and we get a few more to link arms. And when we're 30 million strong, everything will be cool. Do you believe me? You say, Burnie will never get 30 million. I say, just because we may not does not absolve us from doing all we can every day, you and me, to get there anyway. Right? All right. That's going to do it for us today. As you can hear, I'm all worn out. All right. So I need a break. Plus, the sand is out of the hourglass. One of these days, I'm going to have to show you this hourglass. The sand is completely out. And I'll see you tomorrow again right here on myfreedomradio.com, on YouTube at My Freedom Radio, on Fox 28 WPGX, and on Periscope, which I love. If you don't have the free app, just download it. Periscope. Download Periscope. Look, I have more people on Periscope. Download. This guy's going live himself. Let me find out what he's up to. All right, I'll see you tomorrow right here. Thanks for being with us.